Discussion of evolution means we need to kind of define what a species is. And the answer is not always so simple, but one way to define a species is by something called the biological species concept. And the biological species concept says that a species is a group of populations whose members have the potential to interbreed in nature and produce viable, fertile offspring. They do not breed successfully with other populations. So what that means is if you are in the same species with another individual, you have the potential to reproduce and have healthy, fertile offspring, and that's kind of it. What it really means, in a broader sense, is that you share genetic material, or you have the potential to share genetic material with somebody else that is in the same species as you. So, a lot of this definition is based on the capacity for reproduction. There are a number of problems with this definition, though. One is, how do we apply that to asexual organisms? It seems like that definition relies a lot upon organisms having sex with each other. But bacteria don't have sex. Archaea don't have sex. There are even some eukaryotes that never have sex. So how do we define species in those organisms if we don't have that piece of the definition there to help us out? How do we apply that to sexual organisms that are already extinct, like dinosaurs? So we do have other species concepts that will help us in these cases. So, for example, here are two dinosaur fossils, fossil remains, and they look very much alike. You might look at them and say, hey, they both look like a T-Rex. And it turns out that one of them is a T-Rex. The one on the right is a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The one on the left is actually a close relative of a Tyrannosaurus Rex called Appalachosaurus montgomeryensis. And I picked this one for a very particular reason. It is because Appalachosaurus was discovered by a geologist from here at Auburn in Montgomery County. And this is the one of the most important fossil finds of a tyrannosaurid east of the Mississippi. And it's not a T-Rex, it's a smaller species of tyrannosaurid. But how do we know it's a different species? A lot of it has to do with the appearance, the structure of the skeleton, the pieces of the fossil remains. So similar looking, but we still have a species concept that can accommodate the fact that we don't know what kind of reproductive strategy these organisms may have employed. There are other problems with the BSC, and it has to do with saying that members of the same species have the potential to produce offspring, and it requires that those offspring must be viable and fertile. So mules, which is a mule is pictured there in the middle, is actually a cross between a horse on the left and a donkey on the right. So in case you didn't know, horses and donkeys are capable of producing viable offspring, and that's what a mule is. It just so happens that a mule is sterile. It doesn't have functioning genitalia, and we know the genetic basis for this is that they don't have the same number of chromosomes. So they're able to reproduce and have a baby organism born, but that mule is sterile. Now, if species are easily defined and have strict boundaries, and they're not flexible at all, we would not expect this to be able to happen, because we recognize donkeys and horses as being distinct species, and they shouldn't be able to cross with each other. What about ligers? Ligers are a similar kind of thing, where we can cross lions and tigers and get beautiful cats like this one here, which is a cross between a lion and a tiger. So does this mean that our our concept of lions and tigers as distinct species is just a dated concept, that they do produce these viable offspring, which in some cases are fertile, and that 50 years from now we're going to say, oh, we're all cheering for the Auburn Ligers because we don't recognize lions and tigers as being two distinct things? No. The answer is simply no. One reason is that lions and tigers, their natural range doesn't overlap. Almost all of the lions in the world are found in Africa, and all of the tigers in the world in nature are found in Asia, Eastern Asia, into India. And for years I told students that there are no lions in Asia, but I was incorrect about that. There actually are some lions that are native to Eastern India, but their range doesn't overlap with tigers. So I was kind of happy to learn that that I was wrong about that. That there are lions still in India, but there is still no overlap between lions and tigers in nature. The only place that we see ligers is in zoos and circuses and other places where these animals are held in captivity. And we know from looking at them that they look very different. We can apply a morphological species concept to say that lions and tigers are different species, even though they do seem to have a little bit of ability to hybridize. And female ligers are capable of reproducing with either lions or tigers, but the males are sterile, like a mule. So that suggests, again, that we've got distinct species. What about dogs? Dogs are man's best friend. And we know that they come in an amazing variety of different breeds, but they're all one species, right? Even though this Great Dane on the left would not be likely to have puppies with this little Chihuahua on the right. But we still recognize that they're all dogs. They would recognize each other as dogs. You go to the dog park and they would sniff each other and say, yep, definitely a dog. They don't seem to care that much about the size, but reproductively, they wouldn't be able to reproduce together, even though they are of the same species. So how do we explain that? Well, the answer is through something that we call gene flow. And I'll talk more about gene flow towards the end of this lecture. But gene flow basically says that just because these two species can't reproduce together directly, it doesn't mean that there isn't a dog out there somewhere in the world that may have genes from this Chihuahua and this Great Dane. A Great Dane could mate with maybe a big Labrador, and a Labrador could maybe mate with a golden retriever, and a golden retriever might be able to mate with a beagle, and so on and so forth. So eventually you could end up with a dog that has genes from both of these dogs, just not as direct parents. So all of this to say that species boundaries are fuzzy. It's not always easy to say that two different animals are of different species in certain cases. Other cases, it's real easy. We know that humans, as far as we know them, can only reproduce with other humans of the species Homo sapiens. But we're finding out that our ancient ancestors may have hybridized with other species in our genus, Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, and possibly others. And there are still humans today who have genes from Neanderthals in them. You might have Neanderthal genes in you, and that is an example of hybridization. So The fact that species boundaries are fuzzy support the idea that species may change and are continuing to change. Now let's define natural selection. Darwin was not the first person, the first scientist to propose evolution. What he proposed that was very novel and different was natural selection as the mechanism for evolution. And natural selection is the way that the environment can shape a species. Artificial selection, which is something that humans have been practicing for millennia, that's how we get all these different breeds of dogs, for example, is humans shaping a species. So what Darwin reasoned is that if humans can shape a species, surely nature can shape a species much more powerfully because it can act on absolutely every single part of an organism throughout its life. Whereas when we select a dog to be smaller or larger or more aggressive or less aggressive, we're only acting on one character at a time, whereas naturally, the environment is going to shape an organism in all of its parts through all of time. So, in a nutshell, this is what Darwin said in his most famous book on the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. He said these four things. A species varies in heritable traits. So we all vary in traits that maybe we inherit them or maybe we get them through the environment. But it's these heritable traits that are most important for selection. He also observed that reproduction is limited by the environment, and not every individual is likely to survive and reproduce at the same rate. So reproduction is limited. Even if you watch the Duggars and they have 19 kids and counting, they technically haven't had all the kids that they are possible that they have the potential to reproduce. And that's even a lot of kids. Most people don't have anywhere near that many kids. In nature, other organisms don't reproduce to their potential. Think about like a pecan tree has pecan flowers that are going to grow into the nuts that we like to eat. Not every one of those flowers is going to get pollinated and turn into a pecan. Not every one of those pollinated flowers is going to fully ripen and mature. And then not every one of those pecans on the tree is going to fall and grow into a new pecan tree. And that's true of every plant, every animal. Reproduction is limited because of competition, because of predation, because of disease. So the environment limits reproduction. So individuals that have some sort of favorable heritable traits that help them to survive and reproduce are more likely to pass those favorable traits on to their offspring. Their offspring will inherit favorable traits. Over time, those favorable traits are going to accumulate, and individuals of that species are going to be better matched to their environment than were their ancestors. So through time, species will adapt to a particular environment. Now that's true unless the environment changes. If the environment changes, then you can have a resetting of the clock, and new heritable traits may become more adaptive, and that species may become something very different from the species it's derived from.